Thomas Green here with the Peaceful Parenting Podcast. On the podcast today, we have Jake Morgan and Dr. Tim Jordan. Jake, Tim, welcome.
Well, thanks, Tom.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Dr. Jordan, would you like to take a moment and introduce yourself to the audience?
Yeah, first of all, it's interesting for me to hear you call me Dr. Jordan because I work with girls in my counseling practice at camps and retreats. And they all call me Tim. So when people call me Dr. Jordan, it's like, oh, okay, I guess I am a doctor. Anyway, I'm what they call a developmental and behavioral pediatrician. That's my professional background. So I was a regular pediatrician, did a 2-year fellowship in developmental behavioral pediatrics, did medicine for about 3 years. And then about 30 years ago, I decided that wasn't what I wanted to do. So I started counseling kids, like, 1 an hour in an office practice. I've been doing that for 30 years. And I switched over to just working with girls probably about 12, 13, 14 years ago. And my wife and I have developed like a business where we just do all kinds of things. We have a school program for girls. We'll sit with classrooms of girls, helping them get along better in their school environment. We've been running weekend retreats and summer camps for 30 years, and they're personal growth in nature. So the girls come and it's fun camp. We swim and we hike and we canoe and all that, but we also sit in circles for part of the day talking about life, talking about the things that they're going through. And I do a lot of writing and I travel pre-COVID about a dozen times a year giving talks and things. Actually, we're coming to Turkey, I think, in May. So things are starting to open up to help this group do a family retreat. We did it about 6 years ago and it was really fun and successful. So we're going to repeat it, I think in May. So Fantastic. I do a lot of different things, but and my wife and I have been married 40 years in June, and we have 3 kids, 1 grandson who's coming over tonight for a barbecue. He's only 3. So I don't know. That's kind of where I'm from.
Jake, have you got anything to follow up on that?
Wow. There's quite a lot really, but I was just curious why you switched from both boys and girls to just girls, to focus just purely on girls.
Well, I realized I'm 66 now. I was, I guess, 50-ish or early 50s or something, and I had been seeing a lot of boys in my counseling practice, and to me they just weren't that fun. I love boys. I have 2 sons and 1 daughter. Love boys, enjoy being around them, but for what I do, for me it was harder. And I grew up with 2 older brothers and 5 younger sisters. So when I was growing up, I was a substitute father figure for my sisters, especially the youngest 2. They were 9 and 10 years younger. So I've been taking care of, if you will, girls my whole life. It kind of sort of. And also our personal growth weekend retreats and summer camps became more girl friendly, if I can say that, in 2021, meaning sitting around in circles, talking about life and talking about your emotions and talking about things you're experiencing. The girls were like all over it. And most of the boys were kind of like, they loved the camp part of camp, but that part was harder for them. It just wasn't a good vehicle to get them to talk and share. It's not that they don't need personal growth. We just developed a different kind of curriculum, I guess you'd call it. And I also found that giving girls their own space in those circles to talk about stuff, they were way more open when the boys weren't there. Obviously, they weren't distracted. But is he looking at me? Does he like me? Whatever. So once we got rid of the boys, the process became even easier and more fun, I think. And so it just developed that way. And I just felt like girls needed like their own little safe space to do that kind of work.
Yeah, makes sense.
I'd like to start off with a general one, if you wouldn't mind, although I think you could probably talk in depth about this particular topic. What would you say mums and dads' roles are in their daughter's development?
Well, I think especially for dads, I think we're different. I mean, again, this is 2021. I'll probably get sued or something for saying some of these things, but I think dads are different and their energy is different when they're with their daughters in a good way. For instance, I think dads in general, tease their daughters a lot more. They make fun, things like that. And I think it's good for girls, for their dads to do that kind of thing because it toughens them up. A lot of girls in general tend to take things too personal. And so I don't want them going through life, being that kind of girl who can't handle that kind of stuff, whether it's with their friends, whether it's with boys at some point, or with their coworkers or with their boss. And so I think it's nice that we can kind of banter back and forth and teach girls that don't take it personal and send it right back. Because then when they're around boys, when they're in middle school and high school and they're become more interested in boys, they can handle it. They're more comfortable being around them. I mean, that's one thing I think that we kind of sort of do for them. So I just think that there's a difference. Right? So I think us just being ourselves and not trying to be like a male mom, if you will, I think is good for girls. I think our energy is different for them. There's my old mentor. My last year of fellowship training was in Boston with a man who passed away about 2 years ago. His name was Dr. T. Barry Brazelton. He was a world-renowned pediatrician and wrote like 30 books and everything. But I remember in my training we did some filming, and we would have these like 3-month-olds like in a little infant seat sitting there, and then like they would have a mom come in and sit down in front of them and just start to play or just start to interact with them. Then they'd have the dad come in a little while later by himself and do the same thing. And what they found was they did it totally differently. The moms would come in and just kind of squeeze the little baby's, feet, and they'd kind of talk, and they'd kind of like, hey, and they talk in this kind of like quiet kind of voice. And the baby would coo, and the mom would coo. And they developed this nice, beautiful back and forth rhythm. It was really beautiful. And then the mom would leave, and the dad would walk in. And as soon as the baby saw the mom, or saw the dad, excuse me, this is like at 3 months. The baby had this, what he called a pounce look. Like they would like look like, okay, what's coming now? Like they got energized. And so the dad would kind of poke them, and they were just kind of rough, not rough, but just kind of more whatever. And so there's a totally different approach in general. And the baby's response was different. And I think that carries through.
Interesting. Yeah. I think personally that if the girls are going to have men at some point later in their life, then it's really important as well for them to have that sort of understanding of these differences that you mentioned with their father. So yeah, that makes sense to me.
One thing which you've touched upon in your work, which I think is more prevalent than what's talked about, is sibling rivalry. How significant do you think sibling rivalry is in day-to-day life?
Well, it's interesting. I think because of the pandemic, I think most families have been around each other more in the last year, and I think in a lot of ways it's been a good thing. I think more parents are working from home, so there's more time together. And a lot of kids have told me that they're, playing board games more. They're doing some more things together as a family. They're eating meals more together because, at least in the States, I think it's probably true where you are too. A lot of the sports seasons kind of went under, so that there wasn't like rushing around after school every day trying to take this kid to this practice and stuff. So people just had more kind of downtime. So that's been a good thing. On the other hand, when you're in the same house a lot, then of course, sometimes people can get on each other's nerves. So I think the biggest mistake parents make when it comes to sibling rivalry is they get too involved. And and even more important than that, I think they end up taking responsibility too much for solving their kids' problems. So if they hear, like if you hear your daughters fighting in the next room and your hair stands up in the back of your neck, most of the times, most parents walk in there, they've already got kind of a head of steam. They're already kind of crabby or kind of pissy, and so they'll walk in, and then they usually kind of take charge. What's going on? And they try and figure out who started it, who's right, who's wrong. And then somebody's crying. So then that other person must be the perpetrator. That kid gets yelled at, and then they send that kid off. And then they coddle the victim, if you will. That may be a cliche, but that's kind of sort of that's a pattern that plays out a lot, I think. I see you nodding, so I guess that may happen in your homes as well. So I teach parents, first and foremost, to shift their intention, that they're going to get involved in their kids' squabbles, that their intention should be, I'm only here to teach you guys how to do this. I'm like an unbiased mediator. I don't care who started it. I don't care who's right. I don't care who's wrong. My job, when you're younger especially, is to teach you how to talk to each other and figure things out and work things out. So if you come in there calmly, maybe kneel down, get on their level, and just kind of in a calm voice say, what's going on? Would you do this? Okay, slow down. talk to each other. Don't talk to me, talk to her. Tell her how you're feeling and what you want. Then you teach the other one to listen. And then that kid gets their day in court. Then they can share how they feel about what happened. And then you say, so how can you guys work this out? So you guys both walk away feeling okay. So it's a skill, right? It's a skill to resolve conflicts peacefully, and especially for girls, because girls are wired to connect, and girls are wired to maintain social harmony, because since the dawn of mankind or womankind, wherever, 150,000 years ago, if you were part of a group, if you were a woman, you had a much better chance of surviving and your offspring. And so that has been wired in, that sense of being part of it was protected, and that's still wired in. So girls have a hard time, in my experience of working with them for 30 years, they have a hard time handling their squabbles or their conflicts directly with their friends. They're so afraid that their friend's going to get mad. They're so afraid that they're going to lose a friend. And for a girl, losing a friend is like a death. I mean, that sounds dramatic, but that's the part that's wired in, right? If you get kicked out of the group 100,000 years ago, you didn't survive. People who were part of the group had a much better chance. So that was passed on. Excuse me. So they need to learn how to handle their conflicts directly, because when girls don't, they're still kind of upset or hurt or whatever. And they may go, oh, no big deal, sorry, okay, whatever. And they quote unquote move on, but they don't. In my experience, they don't. And there's feelings that just fester. I see this a lot when I work with our school programs. We'll teach the girls some conflict resolution skills. We're sitting in a circle on the floor, and we'll say, does anybody want to handle something? And so we can teach you how. And so we always get a volunteer, and 2 girls come in the middle, and we have them, we have them handle their conflict. And it's amazing how it wasn't something that happened at recess earlier today. It wasn't something typically that happened yesterday. A lot of times it was 3 years ago, a year ago.
Wow.
That's the most typical. And they held on to it. They acted like it was fine, but it wasn't fine. And so they end up treating each other different. Excuse me. They avoid each other, or they may create some drama over here with these other girls. It may have stopped a friendship. Excuse me. And so their ability to learn how to handle conflicts directly with their friends and their peers is really important. And I think it starts in the home. And so if we can kind of shift our intention to, my job is to teach you how to do it so I can work myself out of that job. That's my intention. And it doesn't take like 12 years. It just takes several times. And if they know you're not going to get sucked into it and, get involved in all that, then a lot of times that stops a lot of it. Because some of that stuff that goes on is about, can I get my sister in trouble?
Yeah. Actually, my daughters are a little bit older than Thomas's. They are 15, and my younger daughter's just turned 13. And actually, since the coronavirus and this crisis, this lockdown, I think they've actually become closer. So they are spending more time, as you said earlier on. They're spending more time together, and I think they seem to have become closer and less argumentative, because they can be argumentative when they want to be, but there's been a lot less of that recently, I think. So it's curious.
They've had to rely on each other because, in general, they haven't been able to see their friends. They haven't, if you've been taking COVID somewhat seriously, then you haven't let them go to sleepovers and maybe it's starting to open up, but for a year they couldn't, so they've had to rely more on their family. So that's one of the gifts that's come from the pandemic, is that I think that's happened for a lot of families.
Well, your answer actually touched on my next question. So I'll have to say, excluding getting too involved in conflict, what would you say are habits of unsuccessful parents?
Oh boy. Well, I think another big place I think parents maybe do too much is they ask me questions all the time, like, how can I motivate my daughter? Or, if you have a boy, how do I motivate my son? And I think even that question is part of the problem, because that means I'm the one who's supposed to be motivating my kid, as opposed to it's my kid's responsibility to learn how to motivate themselves. I mean, I believe very strongly in that. So I think we get way too involved in that. And therefore, our kids sometimes don't become self-motivated because they haven't had to be. because mom and dad have been there to really, cheering them on or bugging them or micromanaging them. And so I think starting when they're young, I think it's really important that they learn how to motivate themselves with schoolwork and whatever it may be. And I think one of the most important questions, I was just writing a new blog yesterday, or actually a new podcast, I should say. And it's going to be like the top 10 or the 10 most critical questions that we should be asking our daughters. And one of the top questions is, why do you like doing what you do? Why do you like playing soccer? And when I ask kids in my counseling practice, what kind of grades do you want to get in school? Most of them look at me like I'm an idiot. Like they're like, well, A's. I'm not sure if you get A's in Britain. Is that how you grade? And they're like, duh. I'm like, well, and I'll ask the second question is, well, why do you want to get A's? And it's a really important question because half of them will give me this line of thinking that I know came right from their parents' mouths. Like, well, if I get good grades, I can go to a good school, I can go to a good college and get a good job. And they go on this whole line of thinking. I'm like, okay, I know where that came from. And then the other half go, I don't know, because I've never thought about that, because nobody's ever asked them, what kind of grades do you want, and or why? Or why? I remember my wife and I were running a father-daughter retreat in Quebec City, Canada, about 2 years ago. And these were girls who were 7, 8, 9. And I think there were about 30 father-daughter pairs. And we had done a couple of talks with just the dads. And then we had a session with the dads and their daughters together. And we had talked to the dads about this self-motivation thing. So I said, there was a girl sitting in the front row on her dad's lap. And so I said, what do you like to do? And she said, I love to dance. And I was like, well, why do you like to dance? And she thought, and she was a very precocious, like 8-year-old. And she said, when you first go out there, the teacher's telling you to do this and that. But once I'm out on that floor and I'm dancing, it's like, I can do what I want. It's like, I feel like I'm in control. I can do it my way. And her dad was sitting right behind her, like, because she was on his lap. And he was like, well, I never heard that before. And that's because he's never asked her, why do you like to dance? Why do you like playing sports, the sports you play? Why do you like being in theater? Why do you like drawing? Why do you like doing whatever you want to do? Because when they start to tell you why they're passionate about what they're doing, that's their intrinsic motivation. That's always there for them. So if you just listen and maybe mirror it back by saying, wow, it sounds like you really like, whatever, then they internalize that, and it's always there for them to draw from. Because we're not always going to be there to pat them on the back. And, someday they might leave home, we hope, and, maybe be in a dormitory at college, and we're not going to be there to do that. So they've got to learn how to do it themselves. And I don't think the education system does a good job of that. I gave a talk years ago for a school district. I can't remember where it was, so somewhere in the States. And I was talking about motivation. I did a role play, kind of like what we're talking about. And then we did a break, and a teacher came up to me. It was a man. He said, I'm the high school art teacher. I teach a lot of seniors. They're like the senior higher level classes. And he said, what you're saying to me it so resonates, because I did some reading last summer, went to some workshop, and I was hearing about something kind of like what you're talking about. So I decided to do it different this school year. So when these high school seniors would come up to me and say, oh, here, Mr. Jordan, here's my artwork or my art project. Instead of saying, oh, that's so great and I really love it, I started saying things like, well, what do you like about it? And he said the response was amazing, because most of them were like, well, oh, what? Oh, you don't like it? Oh, I can do it again. And he would say, well, no, I didn't say I didn't like it. I just said, what do you like about it? Or do you like it or what? He said, these kids had no answer because they've been in school for 12 years and nobody ever asked them, what do you think about your work? Mm. So I think that's also one of the things I think that I think we get too involved and aren't turning it over to allow our kids to become intrinsically motivated. It's there. It's just that we kind of distract them with rewards and punishments or micromanaging or doing it for them. And so then they don't develop that for themselves.
Yeah, very good point. Yeah, I don't think I've ever, I'm gonna definitely try and ask that question a little bit more now.
And I think you'll be surprised. You'll learn a lot about your kids. Sometimes your daughters are older. They're 15 and 13, I think you said, or 11 or something.
15 and 13.
If you haven't asked those kind of questions, at first they may be like, what are you doing? Or or they may be a little suspicious. Like, did you go to psychology class or something? But I would persist and
Yeah.
just ask, why do you want to go to college? I ask that all the time. And again, they look at me like, well, duh, and they give me the same two answers, so I can get a good job, make a lot of money, or I don't know. But I want them to be thinking for themselves, because if they're not doing it for themselves, and this is true for girls more than boys, I think girls are, in general, a lot of times get stuck with not wanting to disappoint people or wanting to please people. We're still conditioned them in the year 2021 to be good girls. We're supposed to make everybody happy and please people and all that. And so I think they're kind of wired that way. So I don't want them doing things to not disappoint you or to please you. Because if you're doing that, you won't be as motivated. And also you won't get as much enjoyment out of it or as much fulfillment, because you're not doing it for you or for your reasons.
Whilst we're on the topic of the teenage years, would you mind sharing some principles on this particular age? And the context of this question is you've mentioned touch points before. So
yeah, well, touch points. Dr. Brazelton, the guy I told you before I had trained with, that was his concept that I learned from him. What he meant by that was he used to draw like a little squiggly line, like Charlie Brown's shirt, an upswing, then a flat one, and up and flat. And what he meant was there's predictable times in our lives when we're about to go through a big leap in development. And right before that shift, that transition time, that leap in development, people tend to fall apart. They get more crabby, more moody, just more emotion, as they're wrestling with trying to grow up in that way. They have one foot in the old world and one foot in the future. And there's this push-pull, like I want to grow up and I don't, kind of thing. So you see it very commonly in 2 and 3-year-olds, that stage of autonomy, temper tantrums and things. I see it a lot with girls who are like, 5 or 6, a lot of fears at that age. There's this growing up thing that happens around that age. They're going to school in general, full time, spending a little bit more time away from their parents. So there's this push pull there. I see it a lot in middle school, what we call middle school girls, like when they're going through puberty, like at 11, 12, 13, because their bodies are changing, their friendships change, their interests change. There's just a transition there. High school seniors right now, this is a huge touch point right now, because they're anticipating, what's next. In the fall, they're going to be going off, many of them, to college or someplace, not home. So that's a huge touch point. College seniors, same way. They're about to jump off onto the next leg of their journey. And I think for adults, those months before you get married, if you get married, the months before you have your first kid, if you have a kid, that nesting place. I think when the last kid goes off into the world, empty nest. I think when our parents pass away, that's a touch point. Those are all times when we're going to go through a shift, a change, a transition. So I guess what I want parents to understand is when their kids are going through that, a lot of times, like right now, I'm seeing a lot of girls in my counseling practice who are fighting with their parents, and especially their moms, butting heads a lot. And I think they're all feeling a lot because their daughters are going to leave the nest soon. And instead of talking about all the emotions, the normal emotions that come up, like some excitement, they're happy for their daughter, but they're also scared. They're worried. Are they going to be able to make it? I read all these things about rapes on campus and date drugs, and are they going to be, whatever? Are they going to be able to make it? And there's also feelings of sadness. It's a loss. Your kid's leaving. And even when they come back, it'll never be the same. Now, it can be better. Like, I love my adult kids. Like, my youngest son, he's 32. He and his wife just came last night. They're going to spend the weekend. It's awesome. I mean, it can be better, awesome, but it's different. It shifts. And so everybody's anticipating this loss. So there's a grieving process that kind of happens for the 18-year-old, but also their parents. But nobody talks about all that. All they do is get angry. And that's what causes a lot of the conflict. So they just need to allow all those emotions to come up, talk about it, work through it within themselves, with your spouse, and or with your kids. And when you let those feelings come up and you normalize them, then they don't cause mischief.
And my wife and my younger daughter, knock heads a lot at the moment. That's one thing. I mean, the two daughters are have become closer, and they get on really well. It's a delight to see. But yeah, my wife and my youngest daughter, who's just turned 13, you know, it's one thing after the other. I'm afraid it can be a bit of a struggle, and we're all stuck in the house together. So, and I wish I had a bigger house.
Well, but you know, it'd be interesting to know what's going on for her. You know, why is she butting heads? You know, sometimes it's because there are some kids who are just very spirited. They're very independent minded. And if they feel like parents are making them or controlling them or micromanaging them, they're going to resist. What is she like, that kind of sort of?
She's very creative, and yeah, she's pretty independent. Yeah, my eldest daughter is really level-headed. Takes everything in a stride. She's pretty cool. Everything's, yeah, no problem. Just gets on with it. She's she's self-motivated. Everything. My youngest.
So the younger one might look up and see that her older sister is being treated different. She may have in her mind that her parents love the older one more because she's easier to parent, perhaps. I don't know. There's all kinds of things that may go into why kids end up butting heads, but a lot of times it's because they want more control. They want more power. And I think for those kids, my wife and I have a handout we give the parents. It's like a baker's dozen ways to give kids more power appropriately. Now, it doesn't mean you say, well, I guess you can do whatever you want. It's more like, how can I find ways for you to feel like you're more in charge of your life? By allowing them to make more choices and make more decisions, age appropriate, obviously. Obviously you have the final say, but within that, it's like, what else do you want to have some say so about? Giving them places to be a leader, giving them places to be more responsible. And here's a big one for kids who are spirited or independent, strong-minded, giving them places to be valuable. Powerful girls and boys love to be helpful. They love to be valuable. It makes them feel like they're making a difference. They're more grown up. You know, they just feel better about themselves. I had this girl, I'll never forget this, years ago in my counseling practice. She was about 9, and they came in because her and her parents were butting heads, and she was having major meltdowns at home still, which was, not supposed to be when you're 9. And at school, she was perfect. The teachers loved her, never a problem, great student, great behavior. So anyway, so I talked to them together for a little bit. Then I always send the parents out and talk to the girl by themselves, excuse me, for most of the visit. And so this girl had this little Girl Scout, like a sash. Do you have Girl Scouts or some equivalent in Britain?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So I noticed that. So I said, "Oh, are you a Girl Scout?" She said, "Well, I'm a brownie." She said, "But yeah, I really like it." I said, "A girl just came to our house last week. They were selling Girl Scout cookies." And I said, and she was so happy and proud because she said she had sold the most boxes of cookies in her troop. She sold like 150 boxes. And this girl got this big smile on her face. She goes, "I sold the most in my troop too." She goes, "I sold 250. And then she said, I swear to God, she got this huge grin on her face. She said, "I love sales." So I thought, when she's out there doing her thing and she's doing something she loves and she's being valuable, she is like, that's when she's at her best. So I tell parents, you start looking for places to empower them, to turn things over, to give them places to be helpful, valuable, to lead, choices, decisions, etc. Because when you do that, they don't have the need to do this, butt heads, to feel powerful.
Yeah, makes sense.
Well, the next question that kind of follows on from that, and I think you've touched on this in some of your work, and I think you referred to it as self-esteem, and it comes from a book called The Confidence Code. I'm not sure whether you've heard of it or not, but the stated statistic is that confidence levels drop by 30% between the ages of 9 to 13. Do you agree with that? And if you do, how would you go about changing that?
Are you talking about for girls?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think that's part of that touch point thing where there's all that shifting going on, all that changing. Their bodies are changing, and every every girl goes through puberty at her own little pace. I think the girls I see who struggle the most are the ones who go through puberty first. because they might be in like fourth grade or maybe fifth grade. So, which is what, like 10-ish, 9 or 10. And so they have these little stick figure friends, who are tiny, and all of a sudden they get curvy and they get tall. And sometimes the girls are the tallest ones in the class. And so a lot of times they get teased for that. They get called Cyclops or Giraffe or something. And the boys tease them because the boys are so goofy at that age anyway. And that this girl's starting to get breasts or curves, and they don't know how to handle that. And so a lot of times those girls interpret that as being, I'm fat, or I'm ugly, or I'm the ugly duckling. So I think that all that's going on. Plus, I think a lot of times they're shifting into like a different school sometimes, like a bigger school, a bigger middle school. They get a little lost in all that. Plus their friendships change. Sometimes friends move on just because interests change, or because they're on a soccer team with a couple of other girls. They become closer to them last summer, just for normal reasons. But and most girls have not been taught how to resolve conflicts peacefully. So, they start to butt heads with each other. And I think because of a lot of reasons, they get a little bit more emotional in those ages. And if they're not handling stuff, all that festers. So then I think a lot of things happen around that time that causes them to doubt themselves, to feel insecure. They may have lost a friend. One of the worst things that happens when girls lose a friend, or they get kicked out of a group, or they get teased or are left out in some way, which happens to most girls at some point along the way. And the worst, not the worst, well, the worst time, the most common time is middle school. That kind of 10 to 14 age, that's when that happens the most. It happens in high school too, but I think middle school is like the most intense time. What happens, it's obviously it's not good to lose a friend. I get it. But even worse than that is what they decide about themselves because of it. Because every girl I've ever met goes inside their head and they say, why did my friend leave me out? Why wasn't I invited to the sleepover? Or why the group, why am I no longer in the group? And they not only do they ask the questions in their head, they answer it with their own private logic, if you will. And unfortunately, usually it's not true. They'll say things to themselves like, I guess I'm weird, or maybe I'm annoying, or maybe I'm not good enough, or maybe I'm not pretty enough, or maybe I'm not cool enough, or maybe I don't fit, or something of that sort. And so if you have that in your head, and then you walk into a social situation, you're going to act a lot different than if you're saying to yourself, I love these people. They're going to like me. I'm a good person. I'm a great friend. And so they tend to recreate more of that. And then they go, see, I guess I'm not good enough. And so that causes a lot of insecurity with girls. And then they end up comparing themselves more, always unfavorably. So then a whole bunch of stuff sort of, cycles from that. I call it, like, I teach girls this in our camps and retreats. I call it the spiral of beliefs, where they spiral down, and all of a sudden those thoughts about themselves become their beliefs about themselves, and then it really dictates their behavior.
Is there anything we can do as parents to help them, or to understand, or to sort of lead them away from that spiral?
Well, if you see that they're struggling with something, it can be anything. It's not just a friend thing. It could be that they have a hard time in school because they may have a learning issue. It might be that they're developing slower than their friends. It might be that they got cut from the soccer, they didn't make the team. It might be that they lost a friend group. I would, besides just listening and being there, that's the most important thing. Girls say that all the time to me, especially about their dads. That if I come to my dad and say, I lost my friend was mean to me, a lot of times the dads go, well, why don't you just, so what? There's 10 other girls in your class. Just, we go right to fix it mode.
Yeah.
And they're like, you're not listening. You don't understand. And then we teach them not to come to us. But anyway, first I would listen, but then I would ask them at some point when they're open, what are you deciding about yourself because of that? What are you making of that? I always ask the girls, I'll say, so because of what happened, what does that mean about you? It's kind of a trick question, because the real answer is whatever you let it mean. That's the answer. But a lot of times they'll say, well, I'm not good enough, whatever. So I say, you can decide that if you want, but you're in charge of that part. You're not in charge always of whether the group accepts you or not. You're not in charge of a lot of those experiences. Life happens, but you're always in charge of your story. You're always in charge of what you make of it. And so I would suggest you might want to reframe, rethink about, and I help them reframe and rethink. what could it mean about you? It could mean nothing. It meant that they were insecure. It meant, it could mean a million things, but it doesn't usually, the truth is, it doesn't mean that you're not good enough or not pretty enough or not whatever enough. It just means something else. So you can ask the question, what does it mean about you because that happened? Or what are you letting it mean about you? And then maybe help them kind of sift through that and maybe come to a different conclusion.
One of the things which you're probably asked about all the time is social media. So whilst it's probably not a new question for you, I think it's still valuable for people. So what are your thoughts on social media?
Oof. Well, we don't have much time. Do I have like 2 hours for this? Or it's my wife and I, about 4 months ago, we made an online course for parents about girls raising daughters. And we put out a survey, like, what do you want to hear? What do you want to learn? And we only did two of the three of the most common things. The first two things we did the course on were girls' emotional life and girls' friendship life. But the third one is girls' social media life. And so that one, I've just finished the course. We haven't published it yet, but so I put together like a 6 or 7 hour thing. But first of all, I think I want us to remember, and this is even pre-COVID, and COVID just added a whole other layer, but I think, and this may not be as true where you live as it is for where I live in the States, but when I was a kid growing up, the place I hung out with my friends was down the street, out in the woods. I mean, we rode our bikes literally for miles. We were out and about, and our parents obviously had no clue where we were, and they didn't care, really. They would just say, come back at dinner or whatever. And so we had a lot more freedom. And we hung out down the street, and we had a lot of privacy and, time with just our buddies. And in this country, and I think it's true probably where you live too, because of fears of kidnappings and things, because of a lot of reasons, I think we have really shrunken our kids' geographic freedom. And they don't have as much time like we did, where they can just be out and about because we're so scared. And I think our kids in general are busier, at least they are in the States, with activities and sports. When I was a kid, there were no, club, like we call them here, club teams, or, we played, soccer in the fall. I played hockey in the winter. We played baseball in the spring. You had seasons. Now it's like 12 months of the year, really intense. Is that way too in Britain?
Absolutely. Yeah.
It's nutty.
Absolutely.
I mean, I don't like it that's a whole other topic for another time maybe, and so I think because of all that, our kids don't have much time to hang out, like just with each other. But in the States, if a kid goes out in the street this weekend to play, there's nobody out there because they're at a tournament somewhere. And so we force them, in essence, to hang out on their devices. And then COVID just added a whole other thing of forcing them, to be at home and all that. And so I want us to remember that, and at least to commiserate, like, I get it. I get why we've sort of forced you to hang out there, number one. I also think that we need to be very clear. I made up a handout, my wife and I did, of all the signs of readiness. Like, is my kid ready for a phone or social media? And it became a pretty extensive list, like some social things to look for, emotional things, responsibility kind of things. Because in my mind, they need to earn the ability to have those sorts of things. It's not like this entitlement. It's like you need to be ready for these things. And things like, are you handling your conflicts peacefully and directly with your friends? Are you embroiled in a lot of drama? Because most drama doesn't start online. It starts at school and wherever, and it just gets bumped up big time and spread online or, on social media. But a lot of that stuff doesn't start there. I don't think that created girl drama. So I think if they're not handling their conflicts outside of their devices, then it's going to be worse on their devices. Are they able to not allow words to bother them? Can they handle that stuff? Do they have the ability to, if you have agreements about some other kind of thing, like maybe it's TV time or video game time, if you have agreements like it needs to be turned off at 8 o'clock, just as an example, are they mature enough and responsible enough that when you go into the place where they have that device, is it turned off at 8 o'clock? If every night you're going in there and it's 8:20 And you're like, you're supposed to have this off at 8. And you're like, well, I'm on level 2. I'm in the middle of a level. Blah, blah, blah. They start whining. Well, all they're teaching you is I'm just not mature enough to be able to handle that. If I can't handle this level of technology, I'm not going to be able to handle the next level. So they had the ability to sort of show you over time with other things that I have the maturity, impulse control, etc., to be able to handle these things. I'm showing you these readiness signs. So then you try the next thing, which may be whatever, maybe a social media platform or maybe a phone or whatever. And then you sit down and you talk about that device together and you have a nice back and forth conversation. You educate each other about what's okay and what's not. They can show you stuff on TikTok. They can show you stuff on Snapchat. They can show you things. So you can understand that they have a good sense of what's okay and what's not. You make agreements about time, where, what sites, etc., with them. And then you say, let's give it a try and let them know that I'm gonna be checking in every once in a while to make sure you're, in cooperation or complying with what we agreed to. And either they are or they're not. And if you go in there and you find they made a mistake, then I would sit down and have a conversation about what happened and why do you think you broke the agreement. I would reestablish the agreement, give them maybe another shot. If they break it again, all they're showing you is I'm not ready for this. It's okay. It doesn't mean you're a bad person. Doesn't mean you're whatever. It just means you have to have a certain level of maturity and readiness for these things. Mm. And I think in my experience, I don't give like an age exactly, but in my experience, I would say that most girls are not ready for social media till they're at least in high school with a good track record of those readiness things, because it's just hard. It's hard to maneuver through all that because of their insecurity and they're growing up, and there's a certain level of maturity you need to be able to handle those kinds of things. I think most girls don't have it.
And most adults.
And most
yeah, true.
Exactly. Yeah. It's addictive. I mean, we all know, all those things.
Well, did you have anything, I know it sort of is similar, but did you have anything to add about online bullying?
Well, I would just, if it's happening online, I would want to know what's happening offline, in life, in the hallways of school or in the neighborhood or on their sports team or wherever it is that's happening. And I would talk to them about what's happening and maybe do some problem solving with them about what they could do different, like we talked about a little bit earlier. And then, and I would kind of see, when girls come to our weekend retreats, when girls come to our week-long summer camps, at the check-in table, one of the first questions is, where's your phone? So they hand them over because there's no electronics at our camp. And this is going to sound, funny, but it's not funny, but some of them literally are shaking as they're handing their phones over, and I get it. It'd be the same for a lot of adults if I said, you can't have your phone for a week. But what's interesting is I've done this for a long time, and is that at the end of the week, I'll ask the girls in our circle time, I'll say, how many of you missed your phone? And they all say, it was really nice to have a break from it, to not have to worry about it, make sure that I'm caught up on everything, and just being fully present with these people here. It's like a mental health break, and they experience that. So my hope is that then when they go back to their lives, that they will, on their own, take some breaks from those things, because it is therapeutic. It is nice to have an evening or a day or a weekend or whatever where you can just turn it off. They just need those breaks. We all need those breaks, but I think they do, especially because it's so intense, the social part of it. Now, also because it's COVID, they need time there because, right, they can't hang out like they used to. So there's a balance between and conversations that you can keep having with them about how much time, when, but also just to remember that how important that social time is. And there's a lot of data showing that girls are becoming more anxious and depressed and stressed. I think a lot of it's because they feel disconnected.
Well, I want to be respectful of your time because, I know we got a bit confused about when we were starting. But if you wouldn't mind letting people know where's the best place that they can find you. And also, if you wouldn't mind giving me a take on the the concept of objectification, because it's really something that I wanted to get your thoughts on.
Well, let me do the second first. I think this is especially true for dads, although I was just reading some research, because I'm going to do a blog or something about this too, about how one of the most important factors for girls when it comes to, you know, objectification and all that is their mother's example, like how their mother handles all that. I remember one time we were doing a mother-daughter retreat. I think it was at Lake Como, actually, a long time, like about 8-10 years ago. And we were talking about this. And we had the girls do a drawing of the ideal woman at age 25. And their mothers in a different room were doing the same drawing, my daughter at age 25. And that's all we said, just and we said to the girls, based upon what you've heard, seen, just what's the ideal woman? And then we had them come back together, and then we compared the drawings. And we always show the mom's drawing or the dad's. We've done it with dad's daughters too. These are middle school girls usually. And the dad or mom's drawing is like this girl with like a diploma. And it says there's words like courageous and integrity and successful or whatever, all these really nice things. And then we put the girls' flip chart next to it, and we, you know, flip the chart over, and they have this curvy, it's almost all about their looks. Thick lips, makeup, and there's all these words like thin, tan, you know, toned, has a wealthy boyfriend, you know, all this, she's a model. There's all the things you do not want your daughter to put in that list. And what they're saying is this is what we've been absorbing. But we asked sometimes the moms and the mother-daughter would say, how many of you talk bad about your body in front of your daughter? And all the moms like, oh, I never do that. I know, I get it. I would never do that. I'm very careful. And then we say to the girls who are in the same room, how many of your moms talk bad about their body? All the hands are raised. And we're laughing, but that's a huge part of it. And I think if two things, if dads can consciously learn to affirm their daughters for everything else but that, like noticing their spirit or noticing what a good friend they are, or noticing how brave they've been when they do something, or how creative they are, or how good they are at problem solving. Those are all way more important qualities than how you look. So we just need to affirm those, because society affirms the other. It affirms their body and their looks. So I think from their dads, it's really important to do that. And also there's good data that shows that if you watch TV shows or movies with your daughters, and there's stuff that goes on, and then that spurs conversations, that those girls are protected from the adverse, you know, outlooks from just watching it by themselves. So I think whether it's a book or whether it's an example in real life or a TV show or a movie or whatever, you can use those as examples to say, what do you think about that? And spur a conversation. That's very protective. The way people can find me is just my website's the best way. It's just www.drtimjordan.com, like drtimjordan.com. So there's all stuff about I've written 6 books, the podcast, the blogs, blah, 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 summer camps, you know, whatever, everything we do is sort of on there. So that's the best place just to kind of check us out.
Well, thank you very much for all the value you've given today. It's been great to speak to you. I'm probably sure that you're aware of this already, but I haven't even got through half of the things that I planned to talk to you about. So you're welcome back anytime.
Sure. Yeah, send me an email. We'll do it again. I really appreciate you having me on.
Sorry. It's been a real pleasure, Tim. It really has.
Yeah, it's great to meet you guys, and good luck with your daughters.
Thank you.
And let's do it again. I'd be more than happy to do it again.
Love to.
All right, take care.
Following on from Dr. Jordan, we could talk about the conversation, or we could talk about the things that we haven't covered. But what are your thoughts?
I thought it was really interesting what he said about objectification. My daughters are, 15 and just turned 13, and so although they go to an all-girls school, they are, constantly subjected to images of beauty, so-called typical, feminine beauty, and what they're supposed to look like. And I try and do what Tim suggested, which is to concentrate on their character, and their, when they've done something that makes me feel proud, I will tell them, I'm proud of you. or they do something creative, or whatever it may be. They're kind or considerate, or any of these myriad of other assets that anyone could have. I try and highlight those and kind of reinforce that I'm proud of them in some way. But there's no doubt about it. They are bombarded on TV, and I don't know, YouTube, I guess, and everywhere else with images of female beauty. And so they often talk about how embarrassed they are as well. So they're constantly, they're obviously concerned about other people's perception of them too. So it is, I thought it was really interesting what Tim said about that. I think it's important to sort of show them that there are other aspects about being a woman when they become a woman, that's not all just about their looks.
Well, I do that. I do affirm other things, but I'm owning up 100% to the fact that I do also perhaps tell them, maybe more than I should, how gorgeous and beautiful they are. And his point, of course, was that they'll get that from everywhere else, I suppose. And I thought it may connect to what we talked about with the confidence levels. So like, but at the age of 9 to 13, which was the book statistic where the confidence levels drop, it's probably around the age where they start paying attention to all those things that you just talked about.
Yeah, probably. I think, I mean, I hold my hand up as well, and especially my younger daughter, it seems to be more concerned about looks, and or at least more vocal about it. And so I also compliment her on her looks too. It's I don't not compliment her on her looks because I don't want her to feel insecure. But and if she has a spot or something on her nose or something like that, then obviously she's going to be concerned about it. So I will tell her that it's barely noticeable, that it will pass in a couple of days, or even in a day or a few hours, and that everybody else is always concerned about what they look like, and hardly anyone's concerned about what other people look like. So
I like your earthquake in China
yeah, that's it,
or whatever it is.
Well,
I've
it's
always
not
remembered
mine.
that. I've actually shared that with other people as well.
I think that came from not the richest man in Babylon. That came from How to Win Friends and Influence People, actually. Right. It's like an earthquake. I'm paraphrasing, but anyway, it's an earthquake in China that kills 5,000 people is less important to someone than a pimple that they have on the end of their nose. So obviously you'll initially go, oh, that's terrible, 5,000 people. But then you'll be like, I don't want to go to school today, or I can't face my colleagues at work, or whatever it might be, because I've got a big spot on the end of my nose. So, and I think that rings true to everybody. We're always concerned. I mean, it's awful what happens in Africa, and I don't know if you saw recently, there were in Nigeria a lot of kidnapping of whole schools of girls being kidnapped and held to ransom. There's awful things going on in the world, but I hold my hand up again and say that I'm more concerned about my own children's well-being. Although it's terrible when you see that and you think, I really feel for the other parents and for these children and what's happened there. And it's just awful. I also think, I'm so glad that hasn't happened to my daughters. So it is the same philosophy. And I think, it's something that I think it took me a long time to realize that everybody else is more concerned about themselves than they are about you. And so that's something that I try and impart to my children, I think.
Well, one thing I thought was also of value was the devices, the social media stuff. He essentially said that there's a maturity test that should go along with that. And I thought, I just thought of all the things that you could ask them about, which, what would you do if? So, what would you do if someone said something nasty about you on social media? Or what would you do if, someone put a picture up of you and it was edited? Or what would you do if someone contacted you and you didn't know who they were, or they started messaging you and that sort of thing? And the responses that you get from that, first of all, it allows you to teach them if they don't know. And second of all, like if they don't know what to do or the response isn't a good one, then it's a litmus test, if you like, in terms of whether or not
Yeah,
they should
very
have
good
that
point.
device. Because I don't know, it was an obvious thing to do, I suppose, isn't it?
Yeah, it's very obvious when you think about it. It's just not something you necessarily give a great deal of thought to.
Mm.
But yeah, I thought it was really interesting as well, his point about the fact that these devices, especially now in COVID, have replaced the time that they would otherwise spend. I don't know when you were, I'm a little bit older than you, but when he said that he was out on his bike, out in the streets, out playing out in the woods, and his parents told him, you know, come back in time for dinner or something, then that is entirely how my childhood was from a very early age. When I was 9, I was definitely out in the street with my friends. I had my little digital watch, and my mum would say, "You're going to be back by 5 p.m." That's an alarm, and 10 to 5, the alarm would go off, and I'd go home. And if I didn't do that, then I wasn't allowed out the next day. And so I guess that sort of taught me to take responsibility for my own tardiness or timekeeping. And yeah, I spent an awful lot of time out with my kids. Of course, we didn't have mobile phones. We didn't have the internet back then. So we didn't, we didn't have any real options. But it was, yeah, that's definitely something that sort of rung true to me, that we've shrunk their life, their sphere where they can actually be, and the release for them is to go onto social media.
On the one hand, I think obviously it's a positive thing to be able to get out in the world and fresh air and exercise and everything. But on the other hand, as I understand it, all those things, those negative things of, children disappearing and that sort of thing, they did exist back then. It just wasn't quite as well known. And so I'm not sure I agree with, I don't know, the parenting approach of not knowing where your child is. But then, maybe I'm not right about the fact that.
I think it definitely happened back then. There's no doubt about it. But I think also there were a whole school load of children all out in the streets. And so if there was a predator, pedophile, or someone like that wandering around, I suppose there's a kind of safety in numbers. Whereas now, if you, as he said, if the child goes out into the streets, they'll be the only one pretty much, because everyone else is indoors. And so if there is a pedophile, or every parent's nightmare, I guess, if there is one of these people hanging around, then they don't have to look very far to find that one child that's on its own. So
where's the happy medium then in your view, where they can get out in the world and they're still safe?
Yeah, I really don't know, to be honest, but I think it's a great tragedy that they don't have the same freedom, the same level of freedom that we enjoyed. I really do. And yet I am a parent, and I also, consciously restricting my children's ability to go out and do things on their own, because I have that fear. I have that concern about their safety and their well-being. So I don't know is the answer. I wish I did. Do you have any answers to that? Any ideas?
Well, I suppose you have to be willing to go out with them, and so you can still see where they are. You can still see what they're doing, but you're not hovering over them. So you're there, but you're in the background, making sure they're okay. I mean, that's essentially. I mean, it's not the same because but it's as good as you're going to get in this world, I suppose, in today's world.
So, as you know, we went, my cousin and his family and my family, we went on a sailing boat a couple of years ago, and there was no internet on that, so there were no devices. When the devices ran out of battery, I mean, when you couldn't go on social media, you couldn't do any of these things, and so it was only sort of any games or anything like that you may have saved on your mobile device. And so my daughters essentially spent time, for the first time really since they were very small children, without access to devices. And I think it was a really, really positive thing. And I do think that they didn't seem to miss it. They didn't miss it at all. And they interacted, they played, they were more creative with their play. And I think it kind of rejuvenated them in some way. It sort of refreshed them. It was a bit almost meditative in some way. And the other thing is that being on a little small island, they were able to, we'd sit there on the boat and they'd go off, and the town was very small, and they could go off and wander around, and we could see them from afar. And there was no cars, and it was kind of idyllic, and it reminded me of my own childhood. I think for the first time, the three of them, my two daughters and my cousin's daughter, were just able to wander off in relative safety and just do their own thing. And there was a little park, and like I say, there were no cars, so I didn't have to worry even about them getting run over. It was a really, really delightful little village. And it kind of gave me a glimpse of how things might be, but aren't. And, you know, I don't live in a big city, but I feel nervous every time my teenage daughters go out nowadays on their own. And of course they do, and I have to encourage them to do that. But they go out in pairs. And just this week, in the news, there was a lot of talk about women reclaiming the streets and feeling unsafe walking in the streets, and how they've been victimized and objectified and all these other things that do happen. And of course, as a parent of two daughters, I worry about these things. So in some ways, I guess I'm part of the problem, in that I'm projecting my fears onto them. But unfortunately, they are, at least, you know, from what I see from the statistics, they are real fears and real problems. So
Yeah.
I don't really know what the solution is.
I make a distinction between the difference between fear and danger. So I don't think, you know, if there's actual danger out there, stopping them from doing something dangerous is not a problem. It's logical. Whereas if it wasn't a problem and you were projecting your fears onto them, then that is an issue. So I don't see that as a negative thing on your part.
No. Well, when they were younger, I was terrified of pedophiles. They became the monster in the closet. They became the thing that I wore under the bed, or wherever the monsters lurk. That was the thing that terrified me. And I know that you have younger children, so perhaps you're better at sort of managing that. But I was terrified of pedophiles. I wouldn't let them out of my sight. No, not for a minute. I had to know where they were at all times, and I felt very protective of them. But of course, I suppose pedophiles are actually very few and far between, and they get a lot more because it's such a horrible, horrible crime. It gets a lot of publicity in the news and a lot of airtime. Whereas actually, now that my daughters are teenagers, I no longer have that fear, and it's not as acute. And my fear instead is of teenage boys. And of course, there are a lot of them, and of course, they are going to be interested in teenage girls. So yeah, it's a whole new subject and concept for me to try and get my head around and understand and sort of manage for myself, and also for, you know, how I project that and how I support or hinder, I guess, my own daughter's development. So it's a tricky one.
The interesting thing that I've taken from this particular podcast is actually the number of things, because we didn't even, like I say, get through half of them, the number of things that you have to be not necessarily concerned about, but challenges that you have to overcome as a parent. Like if you had to do like a ratio of positive to negative things on this particular podcast, like I almost feel like I want to highlight a positive thing, because there's quite a few challenges in there, but I guess that's the nature of the job, right?
It's the hardest and most important job in the world. I really do think that. I really believe it. And it lasts a lifetime as well, parenting. I am starting to realize that as well, that it never ends, it never stops, it just changes. It's constantly changing and evolving. Right now, your daughters are, well, especially your third, very, very young. And they're just starting off on their challenge. of life, this great thing that is life. And I've been through that phase, and have I handled it really well? I don't know. I hope that my daughters are growing up and they're well balanced, and then they don't have lots of horrible hang-ups from, I hope that we've done a good job in taking them to the stage now that they're teenagers. And certainly I take the job very seriously. So I want them to become the best version of themselves that they can be. But it's tricky. It's hard. But they are a delight to be with.
Well,
It's great to see them grow and learn new things and explain things to you that you thought, how did you know that? It's great.
we'll try and make the next episode a little bit more positive.
Well, I thought there were lots of positive things to take from that. I thought Tim was had some really good ideas, and I'd be very interested to read his book, one of his books, because I think that there's some really good fresh ideas that I hadn't come across before. So yeah, I thought it was very positive, really.
It's a good point, actually, because he had positive answers to the problems, didn't he? So
yeah,
it might just be the questions.
Yeah, well, those were your questions. But it is, that's exactly what it is, isn't it? You have a problem, or the question presents a problem, and you have a solution. And I think some of the problems that you mentioned are really important problems that need answers. And I think he has some really good answers to some of those problems.
Okay, well, we'll close off if you're okay with that.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I enjoyed that.
Until next time.